My name is Ibrahim, but for 8 years I was Adebayo Olumide, the man who controlled the millions of Africa's richest pastor. While believers sold their homes to sow in the church, I moved 50 million nairas per week to buy the man of God's third private jet. While desperate mothers donated their children's treatment money hoping for a miracle, I transferred fortunes to secret accounts in the Cayman Islands. For almost a decade, I was the financial architect of one of the largest religious exploitation schemes in the modern world. But on an afternoon in December 2023, when I opened a red folder marked "Confidential, Pastor Only," I discovered something that not only destroyed my faith in Christianity, but led me to question everything about purpose, spirituality, and the true meaning of serving God. What I saw in those documents wasn't just financial corruption. It was evidence of a systematic machine of spiritual destruction that transformed people's genuine faith into obscene profit. At that moment, I realized I needed to choose between continuing to be an accomplice to a billionaire farce or finding authentic spirituality that truly honored the Creator. Before continuing with my testimony, write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know which countries my account is reaching, because what I'm going to reveal about the behind the scenes of megachurches needs to reach every person who still believes that religious ostentation has anything to do with divine blessing. What I'm going to share isn't just my personal conversion story. It's a testimony about how I discovered that true spiritual wealth lies in the complete opposite of what billionaire pastors preach. It's about how I found Allah precisely when I escaped the most corrupt system I'd ever known. Important note, for personal safety and legal reasons, I will not mention the pastor's real name in this testimony, but know that this is the man considered the richest religious leader in Nigeria and one of the most influential in West Africa. For 8 years, I was the financial manager of this pastor, known internationally as the Apostle of Divine Prosperity and owner of an estimated fortune of 2.8 billion nairas. My role went far beyond a simple accountant. I was the invisible architect of an empire that moved astronomical fortunes in God's name. Each week I supervised transfers ranging from 40 to 70 million nairas, coming from donations, tithes, and the famous breakthrough offerings that the pastor demanded at strategic moments during services. The office where I worked looked more like the financial command of a multinational corporation than a church administration. Screens displayed international quotations, real-time banking movements from dozens of accounts spread around the world, and detailed reports on the pastor's personal assets: 3 private jets, 17 luxury properties, a fleet of 42 imported cars, and investments in oil, mining, and telecommunications. All this while the faithful, mostly humble people from Lagos suburbs contributed their last savings, believing they were sowing to receive multiplied blessings. What disturbed me most was the mathematical precision of the exploitation. We had algorithms that calculated the exact moment to request special offerings based on psychological studies about emotional vulnerability. We knew when a person was going through financial crisis, health problems, or family difficulties, and it was exactly at these moments that we intensified appeals for more generous seeds of faith. The pastor received weekly reports with names, donated amounts, and financial situation of each member, allowing him to make personalized prophecies that impressed and manipulated even more. But there were 3 specific aspects of this system that I still didn't completely understand. First, the true destination of millions collected in the name of social projects that never existed. Second, the international network of pastors operating similar schemes in dozens of countries. And third, the content of the mysterious red folder that only the pastor and I had access to, but which he strictly forbade me to open. What haunted me most weren't the astronomical numbers I moved daily, but the human stories behind each transfer. Through my financial monitoring system, I had access to the banking data of major donors, and what I saw was a systematic and calculated tragedy. Entire families selling their only properties to make breakthrough offerings of 500,000 nairas, believing they would receive the multiplied return in 90 days, as promised from the pulpit. I specifically remember Mrs. Folake Adeyemi, a 67-year-old widow who sold tapioca at the Ikeja bus station. She donated 1.2 million nairas, all the inheritance her late husband had left for her diabetic granddaughter's treatment, after the pastor prophesied that God would heal the child and return the money multiplied by 10. The girl died 3 months later from lack of insulin, and Mrs. Folake never received a penny back. When she sought the church asking for help, she was told that her faith had been insufficient and that she needed to sow more to activate the blessing. Cases like this repeated hundreds of times per month. Unemployed men donating rent money after being convinced they would receive miraculous job offers. Single mothers handing over their savings for surgeries of sick children, believing God would make tumors disappear supernaturally. University students interrupting their studies to donate entire tuitions in financial liberation campaigns. The system was a perfect machine for transforming human despair into private profit. But what really made me nauseous was knowing that all this exploitation was meticulously documented in the red folder the pastor kept in his personal safe. For years I watched him consult this file before each special service, strategically choosing which testimonies to use and which people to approach for larger donations. He knew exactly who was vulnerable, who had hidden savings, and who was desperate enough to give everything. The folder contained not only financial data, but complete psychological profiles, medical histories obtained illegally, and even personalized emotional blackmail for each situation. The most nauseating aspect of the entire scheme were the staged miracles that happened during televised services. As financial manager, I paid a clandestine team of 23 people specialized in creating convincing spiritual illusions. We had professional actors contracted monthly to fake physical disabilities, terminal illnesses, and demonic possessions. Each miraculous cure was rehearsed dozens of times, with detailed scripts on how to react, what words to use, and when to start speaking in tongues. Dr. Kemi Okafor, a corrupt doctor who lost his license for misconduct, received 500,000 nairas monthly to provide false medical reports proving resurrections and impossible cures. He trained actors to simulate specific symptoms, provided medications to create temporary side effects that seemed like real diseases, and even falsified laboratory exams to document supposed cures. During services, he dressed as an ordinary congregation member and publicly validated miracles with his medical authority, without revealing his financial connection to the church. Even more disturbing was the resurrection protocol, an elaborate scheme where people sedated with specific medications were presented as dead and then resurrected during the service. Dr. Okafor administered a combination of benzodiazepines and beta blockers that created a state of apparent death for 15 to 20 minutes, with heartbeats and breathing so low they were imperceptible without medical equipment. Desperate families paid up to 2 million nairas for this staged miracle, believing their loved ones had truly returned from death. The pastor owned a complete studio in the back of the church where he recorded advance prophecies about events he would organize himself. He had informants in hospitals who provided lists of terminal patients, allowing him to make divine revelations about specific people in the congregation. Private investigation teams collected personal information about influential members, enabling incredibly precise prophetic words about their private lives. Every Sunday was a millionaire theatrical spectacle disguised as supernatural manifestation. But all this was just the surface of something much more sinister that I discovered the day I finally opened the forbidden red folder. In November 2023, during one of the frequent air conditioning breakdowns in our luxury office, I was forced to go out for lunch at a local restaurant instead of the 5-star steakhouse we normally frequented. It was in this small family establishment that I met Alhaji Musa Ibrahim, a 58-year-old man who worked as a taxi driver and possessed a serenity that contrasted dramatically with the constant anxiety I lived moving millions. Musa didn't know who I was or where I worked, and during our casual conversation, I was impressed by his perspective on wealth and spirituality. He told me he woke up every day at 4:30 a.m. to pray, that he donated 10% of his modest earnings to needy families without expecting any return, and that he found more peace in his small 2-room house than I had ever felt in my luxury penthouse in Victoria Island. When I asked about his religion, he simply said, "Allah doesn't need me to be rich to prove my faith, He wants me to be just." That phrase hit me like lightning. For years I had helped propagate prosperity theology that equated divine blessing with material accumulation. But there was a man who clearly possessed a deep spiritual connection without owning a single luxury property, without demanding financial miracles, without manipulating other people to get rich. Musa invited me to visit his mosque the following Friday, not to convert me, but simply to show me what it's like to worship without spectacle. That night, For the first time in years, I stayed awake, fundamentally questioning everything I based my professional life on. If true spirituality could exist in Musa's simplicity, what did that say about the billionaire system I helped sustain? And why did I feel more inspired by a humble taxi driver than by a pastor who supposedly had direct access to divine power? 2 weeks after meeting Musa, the pastor traveled to an international conference in Dubai, leaving me with total access to the organization's most sensitive files. For years, he had categorically forbidden me to open the red folder marked Special Projects Restricted Access, but a discrepancy of 12 million nairas in our international accounts forced me to look for documentation that could only be in that file. What I found inside the folder wasn't just evidence of financial corruption. It was complete documentation of an international religious exploitation network that extended across 23 countries. I discovered secret contracts with other billionaire pastors in Brazil, United States, South Korea, and Philippines, sharing psychological manipulation strategies, lists of high donation targets, and perfected techniques for creating emotional dependency in vulnerable believers. Even more shocking were the real medical reports of people who had died after donating money for medical treatments in exchange for promises of divine healing. The folder contained 347 death certificates of church members who died between 2019 and 2023, all people who had contributed substantial amounts hoping for health miracles. There were photos of malnourished children whose families donated food money, suicide reports of people in debt after following financial prophecies, and documentation of at least 89 cases of families who lost their homes after making breakthrough offerings. The most disturbing document was a 156-page manual titled Protocol for Maximizing Donations in Crisis Situations, which detailed how to exploit personal tragedies, family bereavements, terminal illnesses, and unemployment to extract the largest possible amounts from people in despair. There were even ready scripts for different situations: approach for recent widows, techniques for parents of sick children, persuasion for long-term unemployed. It was a scientific manual of spiritual predation. At that moment, looking at hundreds of pages documenting systematically monetized human suffering, I understood that I wasn't just an employee. I was an executor of one of the most diabolical schemes I had ever seen, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt I needed to make a definitive choice between my financial security and my soul. Before continuing, I need to speak to you, who may feel pressure and spiritual persecution. I recommend the Guide to Ruqya and Spiritual Protection and Habits of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for healthy living, with authentic Sunnah methods for spiritual protection. The price is just a symbolic value because your spiritual protection is priceless. The ebook link is pinned in the first comment. When the pastor returned from Dubai, I made the most dangerous decision of my life, confronting him directly with the evidence I had discovered. During a private meeting in his office, I placed copies of the most compromising documents on his desk and said I could no longer be an accomplice to a system that destroyed lives in God's name. His reaction was very different from what I expected. There was no denial, excuses, or attempts at spiritual justification. Instead, he leaned back calmly in his Italian leather chair and said, "Adebayo, you've worked for me for 8 years. You signed confidentiality contracts that make you legally responsible for any leak of this information. You have a house worth 80 million nairas, 2 children in expensive private universities, and a wife who loves the lifestyle my money provides. Do you really want to throw all this away because of late religious scruples?" When I replied that my conscience was worth more than my bank account, his tone changed drastically. He informed me that other employees who had developed conscience problems over the years had simply disappeared or suffered unfortunate accidents. He specifically mentioned Tunde Akinyemi, former events coordinator who questioned staged miracles in 2021 and died in a suspicious car accident 2 weeks later, and Blessing Okoro, a former accountant who tried to expose financial schemes in 2020 and was found dead in her apartment, officially by suicide. He then opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope containing photos of my wife leaving work, my children at university, and even Musa, the taxi driver who had become my friend. "It would be a tragedy," he said coldly, "if something happened to the people you love because of your sudden moral crisis." At that moment, I understood I wasn't dealing with just a corrupt pastor, but with someone genuinely dangerous who had built an empire of fear beyond money. I left that office knowing I had 48 hours to make a decision, remain complicit and safe, or expose the truth and risk everything, including my family's life. That same night, I called Musa and told him everything about my situation. Without asking questions about specific details, he simply said, "Brother, come to the mosque. Allah protects those who choose truth over lies." At 2 a.m., I secretly left home with only a small suitcase and the most compromising documents hidden on a flash drive, leaving a letter to my wife explaining that I needed to disappear temporarily to protect our family. The Al-Noor Mosque in the Kano district became my refuge. The Imam, Ustaz Abdullahi, and other members of the Muslim community welcomed me without questioning my past or judging my mistakes. For 3 days, I remained hidden in the back quarters of the mosque, while Musa and other brothers discreetly organized my transfer to a safe city. It was during these 3 days of forced isolation that I experienced my first real exposure to authentic Islamic spirituality. For the first time in my life, I witnessed worship without spectacle, without cameras, without money requests, without promises of financial miracles. I saw rich and poor men praying side by side, without social class distinction. I heard the Imam explain that true wealth in Islam comes from closeness to Allah, not from material accumulation, and that any religious leader who exploits believers' vulnerability is committing one of the worst possible sins. On the third night during Isha prayer, something extraordinary happened. While watching dozens of men prostrating in perfect unity, reciting the same words in Arabic that connected that small mosque with millions of Muslims around the world, I felt a peace I had never experienced in 8 years attending Millionaire services. There was no manipulation, emotional blackmail, or empty promises, just sincere submission to the Creator. At that moment, with tears in my eyes, I approached Imam Abdullahi and pronounced the Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulallah. I was born again as Ibrahim Adebayo, free from complicity with religious exploitation and connected to a faith that genuinely honored the Most High. In the following months, with help from the Muslim community, I managed to establish myself in Kano under a new identity, working as an accountant in a small import company with a salary 95% lower than what I received at the megachurch. Paradoxically, I had never felt so spiritually rich. I discovered that true prosperity came from waking up for Fajr with genuine gratitude, sharing my simple meals with needy neighbors, and sleeping every night with a clear conscience. The documents I brought with me were anonymously delivered to human rights organizations, tax authorities, and investigative media outlets. In the following 6 months, a series of reports exposed financial schemes of various Nigerian megachurches, resulting in criminal investigations, cancellation of tax benefits, and arrest of some minor religious leaders. The pastor, protected by powerful political connections, managed to avoid direct legal consequences, but his empire began to crumble when believers started publicly questioning the destination of their donations. My family eventually found me through Muslim intermediaries. My wife, initially outraged by my abandonment, gradually understood my motivations when the scandals came to light in the media. My children, although initially resistant to the drastic change in our standard of living, learned values of simplicity and honesty they could never have developed in the corrupt luxury environment where they grew up. Today, when I perform my 5 daily prayers, I pray specifically for the victims of the system I helped sustain for 8 years. I pray for Mrs. Folaki, for the granddaughter she lost, for all families who sold their houses believing false promises, for every person who died because they chose faith instead of medical treatment. My conversion to Islam wasn't just about finding a new religion, it was about finding spirituality that honors human dignity instead of exploiting it. The difference between my previous and current life goes far beyond financial issues. It represents a complete revolution of values and existential purpose. During my years managing millions for the pastor, I measured success through bank numbers, accumulated properties, and social influence. Now, as a practicing Muslim, I discovered that true wealth lies in the tranquility that comes from knowing every penny I earn is halal, lawful, every transaction I make honors Allah, and every relationship I build is based on sincerity instead of manipulation. The contrast is most evident during Ramadan, when our small community in Kano gathers for iftar, breaking the fast. I see simple merchants, teachers with modest salaries, and manual workers sharing their humble meals with genuine joy I never witnessed at the 500,000 naira banquets the pastor organized to impress rich donors. Here, generosity flows naturally without strategic calculations, without expectations of multiplied returns, without cameras documenting every charitable gesture. I implemented in my new life the Islamic principles I discovered to be the exact opposite of prosperity theology. The zakat, obligatory charity, I pay annually, represents 2.5% of my assets, but is given discreetly to real needy people, without public spectacle or promises of multiplied blessings. The concept of barakah, divine blessing, I learned in Islam isn't related to material accumulation, but to sufficiency, gratitude, and ability to benefit others through limited resources. The peace I found in Islamic simplicity contrasts dramatically with the constant anxiety. I lived moving millions to feed a corrupt system. I no longer have nightmares about families destroyed by my financial transactions. I no longer need to invent moral justifications for obviously predatory schemes, and I no longer live in fear that my complicity will be discovered. True liberation came when I understood that Allah doesn't need my material wealth to demonstrate His approval. He needs my sincere submission and fair treatment of His creatures. My journey from financial manager of a corrupt religious empire to simple Muslim taught me that faith exploitation is one of the most diabolical forms of human injustice. When religious leaders transform people's spiritual despair into personal profit, they're not just stealing money, they're destroying people's ability to genuinely trust God. This pastor and others like him aren't men of God. They're spiritual predators who use sacred language for profane purposes. True spirituality, as I discovered in Islam, is characterized by simplicity, humility, and selfless service. It doesn't need private jets to approach Allah, doesn't require mansions to demonstrate divine blessing, and definitely doesn't demand that vulnerable people go into debt to sow, hoping for financial miracles. The wealth that really matters is the inner peace that comes from living in harmony with authentic divine principles. If you're watching this video and are part of a church that constantly pressures for larger donations, promises miraculous financial returns, or uses your vulnerability situation to extract offerings, please reconsider whether this really honors the Creator. God doesn't need your money to solve your problems. He needs your sincerity, gratitude, and fair treatment of other people. For those who were touched by this testimony and would like to support the work I do exposing religious exploitation schemes, I would be grateful for any super thanks you can offer. Each contribution goes directly to help victims of spiritual manipulation and educate communities about signs of religious predation. Please share this video in your WhatsApp groups, social networks, with friends and family. Maybe someone you know urgently needs to hear that authentic spirituality doesn't cost fortunes, that real miracles aren't sold, and that true wealth lies in sincere submission to the Creator, not in submission to exploiters who use His name to get rich. May Allah protect all of you from religious leaders who transform temples into businesses and faith into merchandise. True prosperity lies in closeness to the Most High, and this closeness can't be bought. It's conquered through sincerity, justice, and genuine compassion. Barakallahu fikum. May Allah bless you all.